Human gets trapped in alien girl's extremely long hair, leaving him at her mercy. David Morgan wipes sweat from his brow as he crept through the dense alien foliage of Nexus 9, remote planet on the outer rim of the Galactic Federation's territory. The jungle's humidity clung to his bare torso, highlighting the defined muscles earned through years of artifact, hunting across the galaxy's most dangerous frontiers. Just a little further, he muttered to himself, consulting the holographic map projected from his wrist device. The readings indicated a powerful energy signature emanating from a clearing just ahead, exactly what he was looking for as a Federation's most successful independent artifact hunter. David had built a reputation for retrieving the impossible. This latest job promised a payday large enough to retire on locate and extract the legendary Luminina crystal rumored to contain the power of a dying star. The jungle suddenly grew quieter. David froze, his instincts screaming danger. Something wasn't right. He reached for the pulse pistol at his hip, scanning the surrounding vegetation. Too late, a flash of silver movement caught his eye before something soft, yet unyielding, wrapped around his wrist before he could react. More silver tendrils snaked around his arms, torso, and legs, immobilizing him completely. He struggled against the restraints, but they only tightened in response. What the hell? David growled, twisting his head to identify as captor. That's when he saw her, a humanoid figure, emerging from the shadows of the jungle. Her skin was a vibrant crimson red, contrasting dramatically with piercing blue that seemed to glow in the dappled light. But what truly captured his attention was her hair, long, shimmering silver locks that moved independently like living tendrils. It was her hair that had ends snared him, wrapping around his limbs with surprising strength. She approached with graceful steps, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Her features were striking: high cheekbones, full lips curved into a slight smirk, and those unnervingly intense blue eyes another treasure. Hunter, she mused, her voice melodic, yet carrying an edge of irritation. She reached out her slender hand, squeezing his shoulder as she gazed directly into his eyes. You humans never learn, do you? David's mind raced. He'd heard rumors of the indigenous species on Nexus 9, but Federation reports had classified them as primitive and non-threatening. Clearly, those reports needed updating. There must be some misunderstanding, David said, forcing a charming smile. I'm just a traveler who got lost. The name's David Morgan, a traveler. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. With scanning equipment and weapons, do you take me for a fool? Her hair tightened around him, and David winced. Look, I'm not looking for trouble. I was hired to survey this region for potential colonization. That's all. The alien woman circled him slowly, her hair maintaining its grip. I am Liara of the Astrian people. This sacred grove has been under my protection for generations, and you are the third human to trespass this month. She leaned closer, her scent reminiscent of exotic flowers, though I must admit you're certainly the most physically impressive specimen. David wasn't sure if that was a compliment or if she was sizing him up as a potential meal. Either way, he needed to get free. If I violated your territory, I apologized. Let me go, and I promise to leave immediately. Lara studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, her hair loosened slightly, though it still maintained control. Night approaches, and the predators will be hunting soon, she said. Even a well-armed human wouldn't survive alone. I'll offer you shelter until morning, and then you will leave this planet and never return. David nodded quickly. That sounds more than fair, thank you. Her hair unwound from his body, but remained hovering nearby, ready to restrain him again. If necessary, follow me and don't try anything foolish. My hair can snap your neck faster than you can draw that weapon. As they walked deeper into the Jungle David couldn't help but admire the way she moved with perfect familiarity through the dense vegetation. Her silver hair flowed behind her like a living cape, occasionally reaching out to push branches aside or test the ground. Ahead, so these other humans, you mentioned David ventured what happened to them. Lara glanced back at her. Blue eyes glinting, they didn't accept my hospitality as graciously as you have. The implication hung in the air between them. As they continued their journey in silence, David knew he should be planning his escape, figuring out how to complete his mission and secure the Luminina crystal. Instead, he found himself increasingly curious about this mysterious woman and her remarkable abilities. What he didn't know was that this encounter would change the course of his life forever, and that the true treasure of Nexus 9 wasn't what he had come to find it all. After an hour of trekking through increasingly dense jungle, they arrived at a massive tree. Unlike any David had ever seen, its trunk must have been 30 meters in diameter, with luminescent patterns flowing across its bark like circuits on a motherboard. "This is your home, David?" asked, genuinely impressed, one of them. Lero replied cryptically as she placed her palm against the trunk. A section of bark spiraled open, revealing a passageway into the tree's interior. She gestured for him to enter, first her hair tendrils hovering nearby in clear warning. Inside, David found himself in a surprisingly spacious chamber. The walls glowed with the same bioluminescent patterns as the exterior, providing soft ambient light. The room contained simple but elegant furniture that appeared to have grown directly from the tree itself. "Sit," Liara commanded, pointing to a curved bench. David complied, taking the opportunity to surreptitiously scan the room for potential exits or weapons. His trained eyes noted 3 additional passages leading deeper into the tree, and what appeared to be some kind of control panel near one wall. "Your technology is impressive," he commented. Genuinely curious, "The Federation reports classified your people as pre-industrial." Lear's lips curved into a smirk. "The Federation sees what we want them to see. We found isolation preferable to becoming another exhibit in your galactic zoo." She moved to a recessed cove and returned with 2 cups filled with a glowing blue liquid. She offered one to David, who hesitated. "It's not poison," she said, taking a sip from her own cup, "though I understand your caution. Trust doesn't come easily between strangers." David accepted the drink and took a tentative sip. It tasted like a mixture of honey and citrus, with an underlying warmth that spread through his chest. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said, setting the cup down. "But I'm curious why help me at all. You could have left me to the predators you mentioned." Lyra settled across from him, her silver hair coiling around her like a protective cloak. "Perhaps I'm curious about you, David Morgan. Humans rarely venture this far into the outer rim without purpose." Her blue eyes fixed on his. "Or perhaps I simply preferred to know where potential threats are rather than wondering where they might be hiding." David recognized the intelligence behind those eyes. This was no primitive alien, but a sophisticated being playing a complex game. He needed to tread carefully. "I assure you I'm no threat," he said, maintaining eye contact. "Once morning comes, I'll be on my way. We shall see." Lear replied, her tone making it clear she didn't believe him. "For now, rest. The night cycle on Nexus 9 lasts 14 of your Earth hours." She rose gracefully and moved toward one of the passages. "This chamber is secure. Attempting to leave will activate defenses. You wouldn't survive. I suggest you make yourself comfortable." Translucent sections of the tree, her crimson skin seemed to shimmer with subtle iridescence. "I've learned to rest when I can," David replied, running a hand through his tousled light brown hair. "In my line of work, you never know when the next opportunity will come." Lara approached with a bowl of colorful fruits. "Sustenance," she said, placing it. Beside him, the purple ones are particularly energizing. David selected one of the indicated fruits and bit into it. The flavor burst across his tongue, sweet, with a tangy undertone that immediately cleared the fog from his mind. This is incredible, he said genuinely. Thank you. Eljara sat across from him, her piercing blue eyes studying his every move, her hair coiled around her like a protective aura, occasionally extending tendrils that seemed to test the air. I've been thinking about our situation, David said after finishing the fruit, and I believe I owe you honesty. One of Liara's eyebrows arched elegantly. Oh, this should be interesting. David met her gaze directly. You were right yesterday. I am a treasure hunter, an artifact specialist to be precise. I was hired to locate and retrieve something called the Luminina crystal. He watched her carefully for a reaction, but her expression remained neutral. I see, she said finally. And what do you know of this Luminina crystal? Only that it's supposedly a power source of immense capability. David answered. My employer didn't share much beyond that, just coordinates and a substantial payment. Offer your employer, Liara repeated, a hint of disdain in her voice. And who might that be? A private collector, Jonah Vex. He specializes in rare artifacts from uncharted worlds. Lara's hair suddenly bristled, the silver tendrils rising like hackles on a threatened animal. Vex. She hissed, the name clearly familiar to her. The butcher of Kepler 7. David frowned. What are you talking about? Vex is an eccentric billionaire, not a your Federation knows him as a collector and philanthropist. Liara interrupted, rising to her feet in fluid motion. We know him as the man who funded an expedition that massacred an entire Astrian outpost on Kepler 7 to obtain artifacts from our ancestral temple. Her hair whipped around her in agitation, and David tensed, ready to defend himself if necessary, but the silver tendrils remained at a distance. I had no knowledge of that, David said carefully. My background checks on clients are thorough, but there was nothing in Vex's history about Kepler 7 or any conflict with your people. Lara's eyes narrowed. Of course, not your Federation covered it up, classified it as a territorial dispute with indigenous forces. She paced the chamber, her movements graceful despite her obvious anger. 27 of my people died, including my cousin. David felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He'd worked for questionable clients before, but never knowingly for someone responsible for atrocities. I'm sorry, he said simply. Had I known, I would never have accepted the contract. Lara stopped packing and studied him, her head tilted slightly. You expect me to believe that humans like you work for whoever pays the most? Not all humans are the same, Yibbit countered, standing to face her. Just as I imagine not all Astrians are the same. A tense silence stretched between them. Finally, Liara's hair settled somewhat, though it continued to sway with a life of its own. What is your plan now, David Morgan, now that I know your true purpose? David considered his options. The mission was clearly compromised, but more importantly, he found himself unwilling to proceed with it given what he'd learned. I still intend to leave as promised, he said, but I'd like to understand more. First, what exactly is the Luminina crystal, and why does Vex want it so badly? Lear's expression softened slightly, perhaps recognizing the genuine curiosity in his voice. The Luminina is not merely a crystal, she explained. It's a living entity, a symbiotic organism that bonds with Astrian guardians. It's what gives us our unique abilities. She gestured to her animated silver hair. David's eyes widened in understanding. Your hair is connected to the crystal. In a manner of speaking, each guardian carries a fragment of the main crystal within them. She touched a small pendant At her throat that David hadn't noticed before, a tiny shard that glowed with inner light. It becomes part of us. Enhances what we already are. And Vex wants to harness that power. David concluded, probably to weaponize it. Liara nodded grimly. The main crystal resides in the sacred grove, where you were heading when I intercepted you. Now if removed from Nexus 9, it would die, but not before releasing enough energy to power weapons capable of devastating entire planets. David ran a hand through his hair, processing this information. Then I definitely want no part in retrieving it, but Vex won't stop just because I back out. He'll send others we will deal with as they come. Lara said firmly. David found himself admiring her resolve. There was something captivating about her fierce determination, the way her blue eyes flashed with passion when she spoke of protecting her people. Perhaps I could help, he suggested. I know how Vex operates his resources, his methods. That knowledge could be valuable in defending against future incursions. Lara studied him, suspicion and curiosity warring in her expression. Why would you turn against your employer, your own kind? Because right and wrong transcend species, David replied simply, and because I'm starting to think there's more worth discovering on Nexus 9 than just artifacts. His eyes held hers, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition perhaps of something kindred. Despite their obvious differences, one of Liara's silver hair tendrils extended toward him, hovering near his face. David remained still, understanding this was some kind of test. The tendril lightly brushed his cheek, and he felt a strange tingling sensation, as if it was reading him. Somehow interesting, Liara murmured. Your biorhythms didn't fluctuate. You believe what you're saying. I do, David confirmed, though I understand if you don't trust me yet. The tendril withdrew, and Lara's expression softened. Further trust must be earned, David Morgan Ibaba. Perhaps you'll have the opportunity to do so. She gestured toward the entrance. Come, if you truly wish to understand. There is more I should show you. As they exited the tree, dwelling into the vibrant jungle beyond, David felt a strange mixture of emotions. His mission was effectively abandoned, his employer now his adversary, and he was placing his trust in an alien woman he barely knew. Yet somehow walking beside Liara, as her silver hair occasionally brushed against him in what seemed an almost playful manner, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. There was something about her that called to him on a level beyond the physical attraction he couldn't deny feeling. Your world is beautiful, he commented as they traversed a path lined with flowers that seemed to glow from within. It is alive, Liara corrected. Beauty is subjective, life is absolute. David smiled at her philosophy, a fair distinction on many worlds. I've visited. The line between the living and non-living is much clearer than here. Your Federation categorizes and separates, Lear said. The Astrian way is to recognize the connections between all things. She glanced at him, a hint of mischief in her eyes, even between species that seem on the surface to have little in common. David caught her meaning and felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the jungle's humidity. As they continued deeper into the lush landscape, he found himself increasingly aware of her presence beside him. The graceful way she moved, the subtle scent that reminded him of exotic spices, and the occasional brush of her silver hair against his skin. Whatever dangers lay ahead, David was certain of one thing. His life had changed irrevocably the moment those silver tendrils had wrapped around him in the jungle. The jungle thickened as Lear led David deeper into Nexus 9. Wilderness, massive ferns unfurled above them, their fronds filtering the twin sun's light into dappled patterns that danced across Lara's crimson skin. David found himself mesmerized by the way the light played across her form, highlighting the subtle contours of her back and the fluid movement of her silver hair. "Your hair," David ventured, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "How much control do you have over it?" Lara glanced back at him, a playful glint in her blue eyes. "Complete control. It's as much a part of me as your arms are to you." As if to demonstrate, several tendrils extended toward a nearby fruit, hanging high above, plucking it effortlessly before bringing it to her hand. "Impressive," David murmured, "and incredibly useful. The bond with the Luminina enhances what's already there," Lyra explained, offering him half the fruit. "Our hair has always been somewhat responsive to our emotions. The crystal simply amplifies that connection, giving us conscious control." Their fingers brushed as he accepted the offering, sending an unexpected jolt of warmth through David's body. Lyra's eyes widened slightly, suggesting she'd felt it too. "We're approaching the sacred grove," she said, her voice taking on a more formal tone. "Few outsiders have ever been permitted to see it." The path opened into a clearing where the jungle canopy parted, allowing unfiltered sunlight to illuminate a circular pool of water. At its center stood a formation of glowing crystals that pulsed with the same inner light as the fragment at Lara's throat. The crystals rose from the water like a miniature mountain, each facet reflecting and refracting light in hypnotic patterns. "The mother crystal," Liara said reverently, "the source of our connection to Nexus 9 itself." David stood transfixed. "It's beautiful and dangerous in the wrong hands," came a stern voice from behind them. David turned to find 3 Astrians emerging from the jungle, 2 males with deep burgundy skin and 1 female with skin closer to Liara's vibrant crimson. All 3 had the same striking blue eyes and silver hair, though none had hair quite as long or apparently as dexterous as Liara's. Elder Torin Lear acknowledged with a respectful nod to the oldest male. "I've brought this human to understand why he must help us." The Ellers's silver hair bristled slightly as he approached, his gaze never leaving David. "You bring a treasure hunter to our most sacred site. Have you lost your senses, Guardian? He has abandoned his mission." Lara defended. "He knows the truth about Vex and wishes to help protect the mother crystal." The female Astrian stepped forward, her expression skeptical. "And you believe him? Humans are known for their deception." David met her gaze steadily. "I understand your distrust. In your position, I'd feel the same. But I give you my word, I want no part in Vex's plans now that I know the truth." "The word of a human," the younger male scoffed, "worth less than jungle mud. Enough, Kel." Elder Torin raised a hand. "Liara has brought him here for a reason. Let us hear him out." He turned to David. "I am Torin, elder of the Eastern Grove. This is Quora, our healer, and Kel, Lara's brother and fellow guardian." David inclined his head respectfully. "David Morgan, I appreciate your willingness to listen. We found evidence of another landing craft," Kel announced, directing his words to Lara while pointedly ignoring David. "On the northern ridge, fresh tracks leading toward the central valley." Lara's hair coiled tightly around her shoulders, a sign of tension. David was beginning to realize Vex has sent another team, she concluded. "As we feared." Torin nodded gravely. "They're moving faster than anticipated." David stepped forward. "How many? What kind of equipment?" Kel glared at him. "Why planning to join your comrades?" Kel, Liara admonished David kept his composure. "If I wanted to betray you, I could have activated my emergency beacon while Liara slept. Vex's mercenaries would be swarming this grove already." He turned to Torin. "I know how Vex operates, his tactics, his equipment. The type of people he hires. That knowledge could help you defend the crystal." Torin studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. 4 humans, heavily armed. They've set up a base camp Near the northern thermal springs, that's his standard extraction team, David confirmed elite mercenaries. Former military, they'll have sonic disruptors, pulse rifles, and probably neural nets designed to incapacitate. Without killing, why not simply kill us, Kerr asked, and because Vex will want to. Study you, David explained grimly, to understand how you bond with the crystal. He doesn't just want the artifact, he wants the knowledge to replicate its effects. A tense silence fell over the group. Finally, Torrens spoke. We will convene the council. Lara, bring your human to the village. Let him present what he knows, as the elder, and his companions departed. Kell lingered, his blue eyes cold, as he addressed his sister. You've always been too trusting, Liara. I hope your fascination with this human doesn't doom us all. After he left, David turned to Lara. Your brother seems charming. A small smile tugged at her lips. Kell is protective, he lost his bond mate during the Kepler 7 massacre. I'm sorry, David said softly. That explains his hostility. Lyra's hair tendrils reached out, brushing David's arm in what felt like a reassuring gesture. He will come around when he sees you are true to your word. The touch of her hair against his skin sent another wave of warmth through David. It was soft, yet strong like silk, woven with steel. He found himself wondering how it would feel to be completely enveloped in those silver strands, not as a captive this time, but as something else entirely. As if reading his thoughts, Liara's hair withdrew quickly, and a deeper crimson flush spread across her cheeks. We should join the others, she said, her voice slightly husky. The Australian village was unlike any settlement David had encountered in his travels. Dwellings, similar to Lara's tree home, were integrated seamlessly with the living forest. Bridges of woven vines connected platforms high among the branches, while ground-level structures emerged organically from massive root systems. As they walked through the village, David became acutely aware of the stares from other Estrians, children with tiny silver tendrils that seemed to wave of their own accord. Elders whose hair moved with deliberate, dignified purpose, all watched the human with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. They've never seen a human up close, Lyra explained quietly. Only stories from those who survived Kepler 7, not the best first impression. For my species, David acknowledged, you have a chance to change. That she replied. They arrived at a central gathering area, where a semicircle of Austrian elders had assembled. Torren gestured for David to stand in the center of the clearing. Speak, human, the elder commanded. Tell us what you know of Vex and his intentions. For the next hour, David detailed everything: Vex's resources, his obsession with alien artifacts, his network of mercenaries and scientists. He explained the likely approach the extraction team would take, their weapons, their tactics. They'll try to divide your forces, he concluded, create a distraction. While a smaller team goes for the crystal, they won't expect unified resistance. The council deliberated among themselves in their native language, a melodic series of sounds that David couldn't begin to decipher. Finally, Torren addressed him again. We will consider your information. Until then, you will remain under Liara's supervision. The Ellers's gaze softened slightly. If your words prove true, the Streen people will be in your debt. As the council dispersed, Lara led David toward another tree dwelling. You spoke well, she said. Several were impressed by your knowledge, but not convinced of my loyalty. David noted. That will take time, she admitted. And possibly action inside the new dwelling, which appeared to be Lyra's personal home. David found himself alone with her for the first time since their journey to the sacred grove. The space was smaller than the guest quarters he'd stayed in previously, but more personalized, with what looked like handcrafted items and strange, beautiful artifacts adorning the walls. You should rest, Liara said, gesturing to a curved reclining surface that resembled a bed. The council will deliberate through the MC site. David sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of how close Lyra stood. And you, where will you sleep? A tendril of her hair gestured toward a hammock-like structure, suspended from the ceiling. Astrians prefer elevation during rest. It's unsafer. Evolutionary adaptation, David asked, genuinely curious. Something like that, she replied with a small smile. Our ancestors slept in the high branches to avoid predators. David found himself returning her smile, drawn to the way her blue eyes seemed to glow in the dim light of the dwelling. Thank you, he said softly, for trusting me enough to bring me here. Lara moved closer, her hair flowing around her like a silver aura. I'm still trying to understand why I do, she admitted. There's something about you that's different from what I expected humans to be. Is that a good thing? David asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper as she approached. I'm beginning to think so, she murmured. One of her hair tendrils reached out, gently tracing the line of his jaw. David remained perfectly still, his heart racing as the silken strand caressed his skin. Unlike the restraining grip from their first encounter, this touch was exploratory, almost tender. Your physiology is fascinating, Lyra said, her scientific observation belied by the deepening crimson of her cheeks. So similar to ours in some ways, yet so different in others. David swallowed hard. I was thinking the same about you. More tendrils joined the first, lightly brushing his shoulders, his arms sending shivers of pleasure down his spine. The sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced. Each strand seemed to pulse with a life of its own, yet moved with deliberate purpose, guided by Lara's will. In Austrian culture, she said softly, the touching of hair is intimate, reserved for those who share a deep connection. David's breath caught as he realized the significance of what was happening. Liara, I don't want to violate any cultural boundaries. You aren't, she interrupted, stepping even closer until she stood between his knees as he sat on the edge of the bed. I'm choosing this. Her hair enveloped them both now, creating a shimmering silver cocoon that shut out the rest of the world within this private space. David reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he gently cupped her face in his hands. I've never felt this way about anyone, he confessed, human or otherwise. Liara's blue eyes searched his. The crystal at my throat. It allows me to sense emotions. Yours are intense, genuine. Is that why you trust me? David asked. It's part of it, she admitted, but there's more, something I can't explain. As their faces drew closer, the dwelling suddenly shook with a distant explosion. Liara's hair retracted instantly as they both jumped to their feet. They're here, she said, her expression shifting from tender to fierce. In an instant, Vex's team is attacking the northern perimeter. David's hand went to the pulse pistol at his hip. So much for having until morning to prepare. Lyra's hair coiled tightly around her body, ready for battle. Stay close to me, she commanded as they rushed toward the door. As they emerged into chaos, David knew the moment of connection they'd shared had changed everything. Whatever happened next, he would fight alongside Lyra, not for the crystal, not against Vex, but for her. In the future they might have together. Chaos erupted throughout the Astrian village as David and Lyrt raced toward the northern perimeter. The night sky blazed with bursts of weapons fire, illuminating the canopy in harsh flashes of blue and white. Astrian defenders moved through the trees with remarkable agility, their silver hair gleaming in the darkness as they coordinated their defense. This way, Lyra called, her hair extending to grab a vine and swing them both up to a higher platform. David marveled at her strength as she effortlessly lifted him alongside her. They reached a lookout post where Kel was directing several defenders. His eyes narrowed when he spotted David come to watch your friend's handiwork. He sneered. They're not my friends, David replied firmly, and I'm here to help. Stop them. Before Kel could respond, another explosion rocked the forest floor. David peered over the edge and spotted two mercenaries advancing with sonic disruptors weapons designed to incapacitate without killing. Perfect for Vex's goal of capturing Australians, alive. The classic pincer movement. David observed there, trying to funnel your defenders into the central clearing. Kel frowned. How can you be sure? Because it's standard Federation extraction protocol. I've seen it before. David turned to Ara. Or they'll have two more operatives circling around to the eastern flank. If you focus all your defense here, you'll leave that side vulnerable. Lyra nodded and turned to her brother. Take half the Guardians east. We'll handle these two. Kel hesitated, glancing between his sister and David. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Don't die, he said to Lara before leaping away, several Austrians following in his wake. What's the plan? David asked, drawing his pulse pistol. Those sonic weapons, they disrupt our connection to our hair. Lear explained. We need to disable them before they can get close enough to use them effectively. David studied the terrain. I can circle behind them while you create a distraction. Just give me 5 minutes. Liara's hair coiled anxiously. It's too dangerous for you to go alone. I'm the only one they won't be expecting. David countered. Trust me. Their eyes met, and after a moment Lara nodded. 5 minutes, then I'm coming after you. David grinned. I'm counting on it. He slipped away into the underbrush, using the skills that had made him the galaxy's most successful artifact hunter. Moving silently through the dense foliage, he circled behind the advancing mercenaries, two burly men in tactical gear that David recognized as ex-Federation Special Forces. No sign of the primary target, one muttered. Into his comm unit, continuing advance toward the central BIOS signature cluster copy that came the reply. Eastern team encountering resistance. Hold position until we can regroup. David's suspicions were confirmed. They were indeed executing a standard pincer maneuver. He waited until both men were focused on the movement ahead before making his move. With practice precision, he fired 2 stun shots in rapid succession. The first mercenary dropped immediately, but the second managed to dive for cover, returning fire in David's direction. We've got a hostile, the man shouted into his calm possible native. Using our tech, David ducked behind a massive tree root as pulse fire scorched the vegetation around him. Not exactly, he called out. David Morgan, sending my resignation to Vex effective immediately. There was a pause in the firing. Morgan, you traitorous bastard. Vex will have your head for this. He'll have to catch me first, David replied, then whistled sharply, the signal to Liara. From above, silver tendrils shot down like lightning, wrapping around the mercenary's weapon and yanking it skyward. The man barely had time to look up before Lyra descended, her hair billowing around her like a living storm. With precise movements, she incapacitated the mercenary, binding his limbs with her hair, while David emerged from cover. 2 down, David said, collecting the sonic disruptors. How's the Eastern Front? As if in answer, the comm unit on the fallen mercenary crackled to life. Team 2 report. We're taking heavy losses on the east side. These things are everywhere. Liara smiled. It seems my brother is handling himself well. David examined the sonic disruptor. These are calibrated specifically to interfere with the frequency of your crystal connection. Vex has been studying your people for longer than we realized. A distant cry caught their attention, a sound of pain that made Lyra's hair bristle with alarm. That's Elder Torin, she gasped, already moving in the direction of the sound. They sprinted through the jungle, leaping over fallen logs and ducking under low-hanging vines. When they Reached a small clearing, they found Torin on his knees, his silver hair hanging limp and lifeless around his. Shoulders standing over him was a woman in tactical gear, holding what appeared to be a more advanced version of the sonic disruptors. Commander Rogers, David muttered, Vex's head of security. The woman turned her cold ass, is widening slightly at the sight of David. Morgan, I should have known you go. Native the moment you saw a pretty alien face. Her gaze shifted to Lyra. Is this the one who captured you? Vex will be particularly interested in her. The only thing Vex is getting is a refund request, David replied, raising his pulse pistol. It's over, Rogers, your teams are down. Rogers smiled thinly. Are they? She tapped a control on her wrist, and suddenly the forest floor beneath them began to vibrate. While you were playing hero, my drones located the crystal. Formation in approximately 3 minutes. It will be extracted and on its way to our ship. Lara gasped, her hair writhing with distress. The mother crystal, if it's removed from the sacred pool, your entire species loses its special abilities. Rogers finished. Yes, we know. Fascinating evolutionary symbiosis. Vex is very eager to study it. David kept his weapon trained on Rogers, but spoke to Lara. Go save the crystal. I'll handle her, but Elder Torin will die if the crystal is taken, David insisted. Go. Lyra hesitated only a moment before her hair wrapped around a high branch, pulling her up and away through the canopy with incredible speed. Rogers chuckled. Noble, but futile. My extraction team will have the crystal secured long before she arrives. You don't know the Australians very well, David replied. Their connection to the crystal goes deeper than you realize, and you've become quite the expert in what 2 days. Roger scoffed. Vex was right about you. Brilliant, but too sentimental. It's why he always had a backup plan. She raised her weapon, but David was faster, firing a stun shot that forced her to dive for cover. As they exchanged fire, David worked his way closer to Elder Torin, who remained slumped on the ground. Can you move? David asked between shots. The Ellers's eyes were unfocused. The connection severed. Cannot feel. David understood the advanced disruptor had temporarily cut Torin's bond with the crystal he needed to get the Elders to safety and neutralize. Rogers taking a calculated risk. David rolled from cover and fired 3 rapid shots, forcing Rogers back. In that moment, he lunged forward, tackling the commander to the ground. They grappled fiercely. Rogers' military training evident in her precise strikes. Vex doesn't just want the crystal, she grunted as they struggled. He wants the genetic key to bonding with it. Human-compatible symbiosis. David landed a solid blow that sent her reeling. Not going to happen. Roger spat blood and smiled. It's already happening. The drones are collecting samples. As we speak, a deafening rumble shook the forest, followed by a blinding flash of light from the direction of the sacred grove. David's momentary distraction gave Rogers the opening she needed. She struck hard, sending him sprawling as she raised her weapon for the killing shot. Silver tendrils suddenly wrapped around her arms, yanking them upward. More hair coiled around her body, immobilizing her completely. I don't think so, came Kel's voice as he stepped into the clearing, his hair extended to its full length, binding Roger securely. David climbed to his feet, nodding gratefully to Liara's brother. The crystal safe, Kel replied, his expression softening slightly. Thanks to your warning about the eastern approach, we intercepted their main force before they reached the grove. He glanced at Rogers. This one's team never made it past our outer defenses. She was bluffing. David realized a common human tactic, it seems. Kel observed, though without the earlier venom in his voice. Together, they helped Elder Torin to his feet. The old Astrian seemed to be recovering, his hair beginning to move slightly of its own accord. Again, the disruption is temporary. Kel explained the elders are already working to strengthen the crystal's protective barriers, and Lyra David asked, trying to keep the worry from his voice. Kel gave him a knowing look at the Grove coordinating the defense. She sent me to find you. He paused. She was concerned for your safety. David couldn't help but smile at that. I should go to her, yes. Kel agreed, surprising David. You should. As David turned to leave, Kel called after him, Morgan. When David looked back, the Astrian continued. Perhaps not all humans are as we thought. It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was a start. The sacred grove was bathed in ethereal light. When David arrived, the mother crystal pulsed with renewed vigor, sending waves of luminescence. Across the water surface, Astrian guardians stood in a protective circle around the pool, their silver hair flowing in unison like a coordinated dance. And there was Liara standing at the water's edge, her hair extended into the pool, connecting directly with the crystal formation. She seemed to glow from within, her crimson skin illuminated by the crystal's light. David approached slowly, not wanting to disturb what appeared to be a sacred ritual. As he neared, Lyra's eyes opened, finding his. Immediately, a smile spread across her face, and she extended her hand toward him. You're safe, she said, relief evident in her voice. Thanks to your brother, David replied, taking her hand. He saved me from Rogers. Lyra's hair retracted from the pool, coiling around them both as she pulled him closer. The attack has been repelled. Vex's mercenaries are either captured or fled, and the crystal's stronger than before. She said it responds to threat by intensifying its bond with us, an evolutionary defense mechanism. David gently touched one of her silver tendrils, marveling at how it curled around his finger. In response, I'm glad I failed my mission. Lyra laughed, the sound like music. Perhaps your true mission was different than you thought. The other Astrians began to disperse, leaving them alone by the sacred pool. In the crystal's glow, Lyra's beauty was almost otherworldly, and David found himself captivated by her once again. The council has reached a decision, she said softly. About you. David tensed slightly. And they recognize your contribution to our defense. Your knowledge of human tactics saved lives. Her hair brushed his cheek tenderly. They have granted you protected status among our people. You may stay on Nexus 9 if you wish. David's heart raced at the implication. And what do you wish, Lyra? Her blue eyes searched his vulnerability and desire mingling in their depths. I wish for you to stay with me without hesitation. David pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that transcended species and worlds. Her hair enveloped them, both creating a cocoon of silver that pulsed with the same rhythm as the crystal nearby. When they finally parted, breathless, Liara's hair continued to caress him, sending waves of pleasure through his body, wherever it touched. In Australian tradition, she whispered, when a guardian chooses a maid, they share a bond through the crystal. One of her tendrils guided his hand to the small crystal fragment at her throat. It would be unprecedented, a human sharing such a connection. I'm willing to try, David said, meaning it completely. I've never felt this way about anyone, Liara, human or otherwise. Her hair tightened around him, not restraining, but embracing. The process is shaman tense. Our essences would merge, our sensations shared. David smiled, tracing the curve of her crimson cheek. Sounds perfect. Lear led him into the sacred pool, the warm water rising to their waist, the mother crystal pulse. In response to their presence, its light intensifying as Lear's hair extended toward it, creating a connection. Are you certain? She asked one final time. Once begun, the bond is permanent. David had never been more certain of anything. I was yours from the moment your hair first captured me. With a smile that outshone the crystal's glow, LRA wrapped her hair around them both, and drew him close as their bodies pressed together in the luminescent water her hair formed. A bridge between them and the mother crystal, initiating a bond that would transcend physical limitations. The sensation began as warmth spreading from every point where her hair touched his skin, then intensifying into waves of pleasure that seemed to connect directly to his consciousness. David gasped as he began to feel what Lyra felt, her emotions, her sensations, becoming his own. In a feedback loop of shared experience, their physical union in the sacred pool became something beyond human, understanding a melding of bodies, minds, and souls facilitated by the ancient power of the crystal and the remarkable connection of Lyra's living hair. Every touch, every caress was amplified through their shared bond, creating an experience of intimacy unlike anything possible between two humans. Later, as they lay entwined on the soft moss beside the pool, Lyra's hair still wrapped protectively around David's body, she traced the small crystal fragment that now rested against his chest, a physical manifestation of their bond. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice tender. David smiled, experiencing the dual sensation of both giving and receiving her gentle touch through their new connection. Like, "I found where I belong." Her hair tightened slightly around him in what he now recognized as an expression of affection. "The council is already discussing how to use your knowledge to better protect Nexus 9. Elder Toron believes you could help establish diplomatic relations with the Federation, the real Federation, not people like Vex." "I'd be honored," David said. "I'm more interested in exploring this world with you. There must be countless wonders you could show me." LRA's eyes sparkled with mischief, including some that no human has ever experienced. As if to demonstrate, her hair began to move across his skin in patterns that sent shivers of pleasure through their shared bond. David laughed and pulled her closer, marveling at how complete he felt too. "Think," he murmured against her crimson skin, "I came here hunting a power source, only to find something infinitely more valuable." Lyra smiled. "And to think I